as China has, by and large, contained or stabilized the situation regarding the spread of COVID-19 domestically, some observers are asking, why hasn't this crisis led to the collapse of the Chinese political system? A recent opinion piece published on the Australian Broadcasting Corporation asserts that China has been able to stabilize the situation because of its so-called authoritarian state. But just like the Soviet Union, it argues, China cannot prevail. Why are some people obsessed with China's collapse and can use even China's achievement to prove their theory? In Beijing, I'm joined via Skype by Wang, chief reporter from the Global Times, and from Philadelphia, Mauro Guillen, Zandman professor of international management at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So just for those who haven't read this article, this recent opinion piece is called "Many Think Coronavirus is China's Chernobyl Moment, but the authoritarian regime could prove them wrong." It appeared on the ABC's website. It was written by Stan Grant, one of Australia's most respected and awarded journalists, according to his own bio. The piece's core question is, what if it turns out that an authoritarian regime is better equipped to handle the coronavirus emergency than liberal democracies? And what if the Chinese Communist Party teaches us all a lesson? He wrote that China wasn't panic-stricken, as many have predicted, facing the COVID-19 crisis, and China didn't collapse because of it. Not yet. Professor Guillen, how representative is his argument, or similar arguments among Western observers? Are many people surprised by China's ability in handling similar crises?
Well, I think people are relieved that the Chinese government has managed to slow down the spread of the virus. And as you pointed out earlier, the number of cases reported outside of China now is much greater than in China. So I think everybody's very happy about that. To your question about whether this is going to be China's Chernobyl, I hope not. I think the world needs a vibrant Chinese economy. I think the world wants China to do well. But what I would say is that I don't think it's so much about the nature of the regime. It's more about whether you make the right decisions. So if the spread of the virus is slowing down in China, that must be because the Chinese authorities are making the right decisions. And that's what I'm also hoping that countries all over the world will do in the next few weeks.
So, Wang, the author says that China is better equipped, or appears to be better equipped, to handle the emergency than liberal democracies, precisely because of its authoritarian state. But as I mentioned, the premise of the whole article is that liberal democracies are better than authoritarian regimes in general, in basically every sense: creativity, governance. So naturally, it should have been better in handling such a crisis. And yet, what he observed has been the opposite. What is going on here? How do you make of it?
Well, absolutely. First of all, there has been a lot of finger pointing going on, but I just want to say, throughout this epidemic, media organizations have done a terrible job. I think probably the worst job by informing the public of necessary information, particularly Western media organizations, when they should be focusing on this new virus and how people should respond to it and how government should respond to it. But they resort to ideological driven attacks on China, like this article. This article talks about how China handled the situation probably better than the other reports have described. However, like you said, the premise and the tone of this article is that, oh, China didn't fall like, the Soviet Union during the Chernobyl crisis, but maybe next time, we don't know. So, that is why they choose, these ideological attacks over the information. That is why we see all this stigma, all this racism, and also this lack of, preparation in many countries. When I see, this epidemic spread through to Italy, the United States, I was, I was astonished to see, how the countries and the people there are so unprepared to deal with this. That's why we see people in the United States rushing for toilet paper, because they lack the basic knowledge of this coronavirus and how to, protect themselves. Because the media didn't provide them the right information about scientific facts,
okay,
and also about, how the government handles this properly, effectively.
Okay. Professor Guillen, following on what Wang said, do you think he's making the right assessment of the role of the media, what the media has been doing at this moment? Is there a sense of arrogance or complacency or, thinking that their system can handle this properly, so they're not really worried about it and they haven't done more than what they have by now?
Well, my assessment is that both in Europe and in the United States, the actor that has been more complacent has been governments because they haven't taken measures quickly enough. In your previous segment, you were commenting on airlines and airports and the lack of controls over who's moving from which city to what other destination. So I think that more than the media, although the media always play a role, has been the very slow response by the government. And here in the United States, for example, let's not forget that just a few days ago, the President and the White House were minimizing the problem, saying that it would go away. And obviously, it is not going away. So I think there's plenty of blame to go around. We could include the media, if you want, of course, for maybe prompting some people to panic. But I think, once again, it all comes down to the same thing. Are we now ready to make the right decisions? Are we ready to spend the money and allocate the resources to contain the virus? That is the important thing.
The author of the article also elaborated on how the authoritarian nature of China's political system helped China along the way and how the system would lead to a collapse, however, in the future. Wang, what do you think the author has failed to mention or to understand? For instance, I would say there is genuine and widespread support among the Chinese public towards the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party.
Oh, absolutely. Let's say when this thing started in Hubei, there were a lot of, public criticism towards the local government, local officials, their lack of proper, response to this epidemic. And then that's why, people got fired. The local officials got fired. But is it enough to say that the whole Chinese political system, the whole Communist Party is failing? That's just absolutely exaggeration and also irresponsible, because when he's talking about, how Chinese system, the authoritative system responded to this, he's talking about efficiency. We're talking about efficiency. There's nothing, there's no, discrimination about a political system, political parties. We're talking about efficiency of the government handling, responding to this, epidemic. So then it's a more of a scientific, fact-based, discussion about how governments around the world should respond to this more effectively. But it's not about how the Chinese, government, the political system is going to fail.
Well, there have been so many articles written comparing or asking whether the COVID-19 is China's Chernobyl moment. Some say yes, some say no, some say hopefully no, some say unlikely, some say yes, all kinds of possibilities. And so I wanted to go to Professor Guillen. How do you see the links between these two? These two? Do you think it is fair? And also, by the way, many China watchers have predicted the collapse of China for decades, right? And this opinion piece also says China has consistently proved the naysayers wrong, but do they, including the author, find the answer?
No, I agree with you. I don't think the coronavirus will in any way destabilize the Chinese government. I think the government in the last at least 3 or 4 weeks has been responding very effectively. I think the comparison with the Soviet Union 35 years ago and Chernobyl, I think, is unfair. And let me also make something very clear. The Soviet Union was not integrated in the global economy in the same way that China is today. So I think everybody in the world would lose if there were to be turmoil in China or major economic difficulties. Nobody in the United States, nobody in Europe, nobody anywhere in the world wants China to do poorly or to have a big problem. We don't want that. And I think, my prediction is that, this virus, we will cope with it in China, in Europe, in the United States, and elsewhere in the world. And hopefully, this will happen relatively quickly.
Wang, let me go to you to this rather tough point that was mentioned in the piece. It says that for all its appearance of strength, China is in fact a fragile superpower since it seeks to suppress the truth and does not trust its own people. Comments? Briefly, please.
Well, I don't even know where to start, but I think the author clearly hasn't been here or hasn't been to the Chinese social media. Yes, there was a criticism, but overall the support for the government and their response to this epidemic is overwhelming. That is why we're seeing improvements in the anti-epidemic efforts. That is why China has become the world's second largest economy. I don't know where they draw up these assessments based on, I don't know what they see, but if they ever travel to China or see the data, like the professor said, China's integration to the global system, where do they come up with this assessment? Or Chernobyl, I think has much to do with the TV show on Netflix, but I don't know where they draw this. I don't know where the system is going to fall. It's just astonishing. I don't even know where to begin.
Yeah, the article finishes with this sentence. He says, China cannot prevail. Then again, China could prove me wrong. So, Professor Guillen,
right.
for this kind of ending, I don't know what to make of it, Why could China prove him wrong? He doesn't elaborate. He says China cannot prevail, but he may be wrong. So what can people make of that, Professor Guillen?
Well, I think, the situation is very clear. China has become a very important country in the world. China has evolved, has changed over the last 30 or 40 years, primarily on the economic front. And I wouldn't be surprised if China also were to evolve politically at some point in the future. But that's something that hopefully can happen very smoothly, very gradually, and in a way that helps global prosperity. Because once again, China is such an important country in the world that nobody wants a major disruption in China.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, finally, Wang, let me go back to you. A recent New York Times article says China spins coronavirus crisis, hailing itself as a global leader, saying now China is calling itself a model for the world in handling the crisis. Again, without focusing on the concrete measures China has done, this goes on to accuse China of its governance problem. Is China bragging about this and saying, hey, look, I did it, so look, we are legitimate? Do we need that?
No, actually, it's not the time and it's not the place to do that right now, because with the virus still going around the world. And also, the assertion that China is spinning, it's not spinning. These are assessments from the World Health Organization, the foreign experts who have come to China to see China's response. So there's no one, I mean, at least I know, Chinese officials or public people who are bragging about how China handled this. But in contrary, that people in China are saying why they shouldn't, more cooperation between China, for example, with the United States. Yeah. It's exactly this type of reports that prevented this cooperation, and it's just, it's just sad to see this. Yeah.
I hope not. I hope politicians will have the guts and the vision to do the right thing, make the right decisions. Many thanks to my guests, Wang and Professor Mauro Guillen. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with Alex. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.